war-torn skies over Europe, encountering flak, enemy German fighters, hellish aerial combat, and an uncertain fate, they flew their challenging bombing missions fraught with danger. On the wings of a mighty fortress.
What made the 8th Air Force air crews go? What made them climb into a fighter plane or a heavy bomber and fly missions?
Nine young men with one common goal: to fly for their country in war and return home to the United States. A group of young men that forever became like brothers over the skies of Europe.
Once we were in the air, we just abolished that there were grades, that we were all just buddies trying to stay alive and do our job. And it's amazing that they put us all together and we gelled.
In time of war, they risked everything. Every mission a perilous matter combining chance, luck, and fate. This is the story of the crew of Easy Goin'. From October 1944 to March of 1945, they flew from an airbase in England to targets all over Germany. This is their story of one B-17 crew.
My name is Bill Isbell. I was a toggler and waist gunner on Easy Goin'. And then in the waist, you have a armor plate up about waist high, and it's fairly close, about the middle of the plane, fairly close to the door if you need to jump out. Well, I'm not very suspicious, but when I went to get my pistol and check it out, there was a black cat walked right in front of me, and I thought about it.
My name is Guy Green. I was a radio operator on a B-17 Easy Goin'. When you go into the service during a war, you realize that you have a responsibility, and my father told me when I left that you have a job to do and do the best thing you can.
This is a photograph of my graduation of the 44 class of 44C at Albany, Georgia. That means in 1944, and I had just completed twin engine school. I was transferred to the field at Orham, England, the 95th Bombardment Group. This was called the Mighty Eighth, and they were the first B-17s to bomb Berlin.
Initially, I was drawn to this story of the crew of Easy Goin' because I thought it was a great flying story. But then I realized it was a compelling human drama of young men who served valiantly in Europe during World War II.
They felt like they had a job to do, that they had a duty to do it, but particularly they had a job to do to not let their fellow crewmen down. It took all 10 men in each position on the airplane, the bomber, to make the mission a success. And any weakness in any of those areas affected the chances of the bomber and its crewmen coming back alive.
This B-17 crew of John Gross's, easygoing, was typical of many 95th Bomb Group flight crews. They were from all over America, very diverse, very different religions, backgrounds, hometowns. These young men served their country so well over the skies of Europe. Once I met them, I realized I had to tell their story, truly a story of courage, hope, and faith.
They came from all over America. The pilot, the natural leader of the young men, was John Gross Jr., age 21, who grew up on a farm in the rolling valleys near Civil War-era battlefields of eastern Pennsylvania, and had great-grandparents on both sides of the family who immigrated from Germany.
My name is John W. Gross Jr. I was a pilot in World War II, flying B-17s and stationed in Orham, England, H-O-R-H-A-M. Upon completion of high school, I attended Muhlenberg College for 2 years. I was walking across the campus on Sunday, and some fellows, 3 fellows, I remember that, were walking the opposite direction and said, did you hear that they bombed Pearl Harbor today? And so that was my introduction to World War II, and rather than be drafted, that's when I enlisted in the Air Force.
Bill Isbell, a waist gunner and togolier, was a tall, lanky young man from the Deep South, a sophomore at Auburn University when he volunteered for the war.
Had a good crew, and all of them were great fellas, just real comfortable with each other. Anybody been in combat that much with others, you know, you couldn't hurt anybody's feelings or do anything to them. You know, it's just a good feeling, you know, like brothers.
Guy Green, an all-American-looking, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, handsome young man with dashing looks that loved the Chicago Bears NFL football team, came from the south side of Chicago and was the radio operator and waist gunner.
But the bond is there. It's they're very close friends. You never forget them. And when we lose one, it's a great loss. It's like losing your best friend.
Art Mendias, the flight engineer and top turret gunner, came from San Francisco, from a Latino family of Mexican-American heritage. Dan Jaworski, the navigator, yet a teenager without a driver's license when he signed up for the Army Air Corps, called Milwaukee, Wisconsin his home, and lived in the deep-rooted Polish-American suburbs. George Aspercolis, the oldest of the crew at age 26, was a brash city kid from New Jersey, a Greek-American whose father and mother had made it to America through Ellis Island in New York Harbor. Can you tell me where your place of birth was and when you were born?
Yeah, I know when I was born. On Sunday afternoon, about 3 o'clock, December the 17th, 1916.
16. Where were you born?
New York City.
New York City.
My mother's was Austrian extraction, my father was Greek.
You've got to know George to know him, and to know him is to love him. I mean, he's really a great guy. I remember him when we'd come back from a mission, why they'd give us a drink of liquor if we wanted it. And George was always willing to take yours if you didn't want it. And he was just a fun guy, really, and we were proud as punch of him when he got to be lead bombardier.
Max Rammel was a tall, lean, strapping farm kid with German roots and a devout Mormon who lived on a 4,000-acre wheat farm in Teutonia, Idaho.
We flew over Death Valley. That's where we got our training. I trained in the ball turret. I never flew in the tail while we were there. But after we graduated from gunnery school, and they shipped us to Florida, to a place called Plant Park, an old ballpark in the middle of Tampa, with barracks underneath, and there we were. I guess they were just waiting a slot for us.
Sure.
And then we eventually ended up at MacDill Field, and that's where our air crew was made up of our present crew.
Okay.
And we got our overseas flight training at MacDill.
Eddie Morrison, the ball turret gunner, a Catholic high school student from Newark, New Jersey, studied acting and drama and was an altar boy in his local parish back home.
Edward Francis Patrick Morrison, I was a ball turret operator, and Guy Green always kidded me about Francis Patrick. We felt we owed each other our lives, but then we got that special link together, and that we gelled together.
Although there were several co-pilots during the combat tour, the majority of the missions being flown were with a young redhead Irishman named Tom O'Hara of Ithaca, New York, also flown by a Jewish kid from Detroit named Max Bunin.
John Gross's crew on Easy Going is very representative of all 95th Bomb Group crews. These were young men that were taken from the farmlands, from the heartland, from the cities all across the nation as the United States entered World War II.
The B-17 bomber, named Easy Going, was operated by 9 highly trained men. Each man had a specific job to ensure the safety of the aircraft and the success of the mission. 22-year-old pilot John Gross was in command of the plane and crew, seated in the cockpit in the left seat. Co-pilots were seated next to the pilot on the right side of the cockpit. The pilot and co-pilot were responsible for the safe operation of the flight, including the accomplishment of all checklist procedures. The bombardier, George Aspercolis, was in the nose compartment up front, manning his position, looking down the famed Norden bomb site. Navigator Danny Jaworski sat to the left and rear of the bombardier in the lower compartment. His charts and navigation equipment sprawled out on the table station. Flight engineer Artman Diaz was directly behind the pilot cockpit seats, aiding in the systems and engine operation. When required, he would also man the top turret gun position. Radio operator Guy Green sat behind the forward crew at a table with an array of communication radios and served as backup waist gunner when needed. The 2 waist gunner positions were midship on either side, one manned by Bill Isbell, the other by the radio operator Guy Green. Below the belly of the plane was the ball turret position, manned by Eddie Morrison. The tail gunner's position was in the extreme far aft portion of the plane, where Max Rammel was ready to protect their ship from a rear attack.
After we took off, we were all in the same level. We're no yes sir, no sir, or whatever. We're all there to save our lives. And that's the way we developed a very, very good friendship.
I've seen a lot of interviews by crew members, and they always remark about the bond, because you're up there, 9 guys, and you're all in debt to the other one. You relied on what they were doing, and it's like a family. It's really like a family.
As far as I'm concerned, and as I said, the B-17 was a flying cub with 4 engines. It had a large wing, which gave it stability it wasn't very fast. We only cruised like 165 mile an hour on missions. But if you've seen some of the war pictures, they did return being shot up very, very much. I always remember the one, if you saw that where they came across the tail, and you could see right through the tail, but they still brought it back, you know. It was very airworthy, you know, very dependable.
Well, the B-17 was, I think, was probably the finest plane that was ever built in that era, and it would take a lot of punishment. We saw evidence of pictures of tails being blown off, wings being blown off, and it was a very dependable aircraft. When you think of the punishment some of them took, it was unbelievable. And over the years, it was always recognized. It was called the Flying Fortress, mainly because it had the firepower to defend itself.
Well, it was just real reliable, and it could take a lot of punishment. And it would run on two engine, and I guess it would run on one if you didn't have the bombs and stuff. But it was just those women that put those rivets in there. They must have done a good job, because it was put together. It didn't come apart easy.
You know, I think I've always been inspired by flying, and my first glimpse of the beautiful B-17 was when they used to fly test flights over our wheat fields in Idaho. Those big planes would come in at low level on their training missions, and as I looked at them in the sky, I thought, oh, that's what I want to do.
The last mission, we had some flak in the fuel tank, which they're self-sealing, and in one of the engine nacelles, and through the waist area. And we had part of the main spar in the bomb bay shot out. And it's amazing that the plane, it just was airworthy and just flew fine.
You really had a lot of equipment on. Well, you had, when you're flying up there, you had a long handle underwear, and then you had a wool uniform on, then you had a flight suit, and then you had a outside wrap, and then you had the harness, parachute harness, then you had a flak vest on that, you had a pistol inside, and those flak vests in those days were just metal and with a cloth over it, and they weighed a lot, and then you had your GI shoes were tied to your belt, so if you had to bail out, see that you couldn't walk much in those flying suit.
The B-17 was a beautiful ship in looks and an ability to fly. It had a lot of wing capacity and a lot of cubic feet, and I loved it.
I remember the first one I saw, we went up past the church and looked through the hedge and saw the big camouflage machine and thought it was huge, you know.
The aircraft, it's like an old shoe. It was really something you depended upon, and it was always there for you. And we didn't look at it as like an automobile or anything. It was a good friend, and it took us on a lot of journeys and brought us back. Even sometimes when you didn't have all your engines, it still was there. And I think you talk to any crew member that flew on a B-17, they have nothing but great things to say about it.
By the time the crew of Easy Going were flying from October of 1944 to March of 45, the 8th Air Force had become the greatest air armada the world had ever seen. They had overcome their problems of supply, of replacement parts, of well-trained crews, and now they could standardly put 1,000 planes or more in the air on each mission, and they were pretty much flying a mission every day.
members of the 95th Bombardment Group of the 8th Air Force in World War II, somewhere in England meant U.S. Army Air Corps Airfield Number 119, Horham, England. Located in the rolling English farmland near the town of Eye, 80 miles from the North Sea, this small hamlet was transformed into the chaotic machine of war in dramatic fashion almost overnight. Horham went from a population of 200 to 3,500 for the 4 years of the war when the Yanks came to town. 3 runways were plowed into the farmland, followed by hangars, a hospital, barracks, and numerous airfield buildings. Horham was the home of the 95th Bomb Group, which consisted of 4 squadrons, the 412th, the 334th, the 335th, and easygoing squadron, the 336th. Every bomb group had a unique designation painted on the tails of their aircraft. The 95th aircraft had a square B.
Back at the base, right near the church, they have a granite figuration of the dorsal fin of the B-17, and it's got the B on the tail, and it also has a plaque on one side that describes the history of the 95th Bomb Group.
The Church of St. Mary's in Horham stands watch over the airfield near Hard Stand 29, as it has for centuries before the war. The lofty and graceful tower, with its elegant pair of double belfry windows, was both an important symbol and a critical landmark for the airmen who served there. Inside its hallowed walls, the young airmen sat somberly on rough, wooden-hewn pews, praying for strength and courage before missions. Returning from harrowing combat, the pilots often used the church's Norman spire to help guide them safely back to the base. Horham, whose name means a muddy village or settlement, is the proud possessor of the oldest ring of 8 bells in the world, up in St. Mary's Tower.
At the beginning of the war in 1939, it was forbidden to ring any church bells, and they were only to be rung in the event of the country being invaded. It wasn't until after 1942, when the threat of the invasion had more or less disappeared, that they were allowed to be rung for church services and the like, as we always used to ring them. On the 8th of May in 1945, bells were rung in all the village churches to celebrate the victory in Europe.
Horham was a nice little town with only, golly, maybe 10 or 12 houses and a bend in the road. And they had a church there that was, I guess part of it was 250 years old and part of it was 500. And it was in disarray. And following the war, the 95th Bombardment Group Committee got together and provided funds for new bells and to fix up that church, and they were just wonderful towards us. We went back there to a reunion, and as you did, and they've made a museum out of the airfield, and they just were wonderful people. The one lady that we met following the war said, "I was just a little girl walking to school one day when a B-17 came in and on takeoff and had a crash." And she said, "That's still up here," but they were wonderful people.
My name is Alan Johnson. I live in the village of Horham in Suffolk, East Anglia, about 300 yards from the air base at Horham. I was born in Horham, a little village in East Anglia, home of the 95th Bomb Group. I still live there. I was 7 during the war, when the Americans came. I remember the trucks coming up the hill. about 3 foot behind each other, all the gear stowed on, MPs directing them around this way and that way, and after them, because the village went from a hermit village to a anthill.
A lot of the village people used to actually come on the base. The local people, with rationing on, always thought the world of the Americans over here because they were generous. Well, crews like Easy Going, when they arrived at Horham in October 1944, they were coming over here to help our country. They were invited into their houses for meals, parties or social gatherings, but also there was very much a bond which started during those times. We find that there's friendships being struck up during those war years. They are very, very strong to this day.
The village of Horham came alive. Its loyal British citizens embraced the Yanks. One such family was the Johnson family, just kids back during the war. The bonds that were created lasted a lifetime.
Well, I'm Alan Johnson. I was born in 1936, and I don't remember so much about the war as my brother and sister here. I remember quite a bit about it. The crashes and the foggy days and the New Year's. But happy days. That's me.
I'm Alan and David's sister Ruth. I'm older than them. I was 11 during the war, and my biggest memory really was listening out for the B-17s to take off to go on a mission, and we would just dash up to the runway and watch them all go.
My name's David Johnson. I was born in 1935, and my everlasting memory of the Americans is really their sheer friendship to us. And here we are now, still enjoying it, in the company of these wonderful, wonderful people who helped us win the war.
But the first mission they did, I remember we got up early to watch it. And Mum used to count them in and count them out and count them back in again. A lot of memories, good, bad, the foggy days, the crashes and the carnage, and one that crashed on takeoff. It actually blew the roof off the house where I lived in, and landed on the farmhouse and burnt the farmhouse down. Green Farm, Redmondville.
During my book research, I came across some remarkable facts about Horham and the 95th Bomb Group. In just 2 short years from 1943 to 1945 at Horham, it's hard to believe they flew 321 missions. 617 men perished. Over 70 per month were either killed, wounded, or taken prisoner of war. 196 bombers were lost. They never came back. That was on average around 1 every 4th day.
Prior to our having to have 35 missions, when they didn't have adequate fighter support, they had required 25 missions. So when we were over, then they had 35, and they were considering going to 50 missions, but we had 35.
First mission was to Hanover, Germany, and one nice thing about it, as I recall, is there was a crew in our barracks that went out with us in the morning, which was an experience that you felt that people cared, and it reassured us a lot, because I think anybody, when you're first going on your first mission, they think a lot about you're going to enter an unknown territory, and you don't know what's in store for you. You heard a lot of stories, and they had pictures on a bulletin board of B-17s going down.
I didn't want to die. I knew there was a good possibility that I would.
I was in charge of the bombs and had armed the bombs before they were dropped, which was pulling the cotter pins out, which armed them.
No, I've got the cotter pins, and that was where I had the record of my missions. What we used to do with those cotter pins, when we come back, our engineer would pull the pins to defuse the bombs, so the bombs would be live. And then he'd bring all the pins back to the barracks, and he'd pass them out to the crew members, and we'd write the mission, the date, and then we would pin them to the blackout curtains until we got our 35 missions.
They pick you up around 2 o'clock in the morning, depending on where you're going to go that day, and they take you into the mess hall, and we would generally have fried eggs, which we had to pay $2 and 10 shillings a month for the fresh eggs. Otherwise, it would be powdered eggs or pancakes or something like that. And it's pretty hard to digest a meal at 2 o'clock in the morning of pancakes or eggs. And then from there, we would go to briefing, where they had a large map in the front that had a curtain that was covering the map. And after everybody got in there, then the briefing officer would come in, and they would draw the drapes, and it would show the route that you were going to take. And they had twine that would go showing with pins, stick pins, and it would show you exactly where you were going to travel.
We had a briefing room that we went to, and when you went in there and you all sat down, and then they would roll back the curtain, and this is where you're going to go today. I don't know how many people have ever had the opportunity to get up and say, this is a day I might die, and I think it makes you mature. We did have a little chapel on the base, and it was difficult to get a seat in there in the morning when you were going on a mission. You can either be at the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time. Yes, we were lucky. As I said before, my wife asked, could I have died? I said, yeah, 1,000 times. One of the dangerous parts of our mission was getting the 10-wheel truck and going out to the airplane. Those fellows would drive so recklessly. We were going out one time in a semi-fog, and he almost drove into a taxiing B-17. And we complained about it, but they never did anything about it. I guess those guys just like to test their trucks or whatever.
I do remember something on my first mission. I was scared, and I got on the intercom, and John calmed me down. I was really scared, and he said, "Hey, just relax. Things are going to be all right." I remember him telling me that.
One of the most frightening things on the mission was when we form in the morning. We would go from the ground up to 25, 30,000. And when you think about 2,000 planes milling around in all that weather in the morning, it's a wonder that there weren't hundreds of planes that were lost. My job as a radio operator, we would throw out chaff which had an electrical charge on it, which would disturb the radar on the anti-aircraft guns. And I'd have to turn it completely around to feed the chaff out the chute. And one time my oxygen hose got detached, and you just kind of fade off into la la land. And of course, in probably 3 or 4 minutes, you'd be dead if you did not. But we used to have oxygen checks, which they go around all stations and ask you if you were okay.
I would check the crew. The way you checked the crew was to give everybody would give the amount of oxygen they had. If you read your dial, they figured you weren't suffering from lack of oxygen. So they started at the tail gunner, say tail gunner 75 pounds, and then the waist and so forth. And that after we got up to the altitude, we started on that at 10,000 feet.
It had just a thin sheet of aluminum that was between you and the outside, and it was cold. We used to get up to altitude to 80 degrees centigrade below zero, and if you didn't keep yourself covered, you were gonna get frostbite.
Oh, and the nose got shot off, and I had to pull the thing out to keep from freezing to death. The temperature up there is crazy. It's like 100 below zero. I don't know what the hell it is. It's so damn cold you can't touch any metal with your bare hands. It'll stick there, freeze. You know, aluminum. They had gloves, had silk gloves on and heated gloves on top of it.
It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was 7 or 8 years old. I was in Stradbroke Primary School playground, and I saw, it was a foggy day, and I looked up and saw the B-17 coming over from the coast. Just as it got above the playground, it was only about 300 feet high. Suddenly a Thunderbolt fighter came and chopped it exactly in two. And the main fuselage was slowly down, and they were all bailing out, and successfully bailing out. But as the tail came down, slowly revolving, I, as a little kid, looked up and said, get out, to the tail gunner. And after seeing an age, he came out, pulled the ripcord, but it didn't open. He just went down and he was killed. And that was not just over there when it finished up. Well, that was above me when it happened. Yeah, again, these things are vivid, you don't forget them.
November 2nd, 1944.
During the course of World War II, different targets were concentrated on at different times. At first, it was the submarines because of the Battle of the North Atlantic. And then in preparation for D-Day, they went after the transportation so that the Germans could not move their forces to the front. And they also targeted factories, particularly those involved in producing aircraft. And General Spaatz always wanted to go after the oil. And occasionally this happened in earlier periods, but by the time the crew of Easygoing was flying, oil had become one of the high priorities. And in interviews conducted by the Strategic Bombing Survey at the end of World War II, the Allies learned just how significant the oil targets were towards forcing the Germans into surrender.
Third one, November 2nd, 1944, Merseburg, Germany. We had 10 500-pounders, GPs. The oil refinery is a target. Hit, target hit. Bomb PFF, good results, very heavy flak. 5 hits on the ship, 1 in my helmet. Stunned me, and that's the one that I remember. It stunned me and blinded me. I got hit in the helmet over the bomb site. And see, I run the missions on the wing and had my bomb sight working all the time, just like, in case he drops something, I'm on it, You just got to click me to the switch on. He hit me and bang, shot me and stunned me. Everything went just like everything got black. I said, I'm hit. I'm hit, and I think I'm blinded. I hit my helmet and blinded me momentarily. So a B-17 blow up by direct hit. We had lead. We led the 13th Division today and flew wing off of Hanson.
Went to Merseburg, and it was an oil target, and they defended those real heavily. I saw a B-17 right, but not exactly back of us because I couldn't see straight back, but back into the side, and it just looked like it exploded into little bitty pieces. It wasn't just a little, it just like a hand that just pulled it down there. Wow. And I think we lost 50 planes out of 1,000 at Merseburg, I believe. It was, they protected the oil and the ball bearing plants and that type with a lot of guns.
As a ball turret, we had a vision of 360 degrees all around, and then up and down 180 degrees. So when bombs would go out, if they went out and train, I'd say they're gone. If they went out and trail, I would count the bombs as they went down, and I would follow down to see where if they hit or not. So I could see planes. The only thing I couldn't see was above me, but I could see planes in front of me, behind me, to each side. And so I don't know whether that was good or bad, because at Merseburg, that was the first time I saw planes go down.
In January of 1945, 62 B-17s were shot down over Merseburg from flak alone, and that meant there were 540 men in those planes. And one thing, when you lose one plane, you're losing 9 people. In Cambridge, England, there's a cemetery where there's 5,000 8th Air Force airmen buried. And when you walk around there, it makes you think a lot about the lives that were given.
On December 15th, 1944, the boys of Easy Going found themselves on an interesting mission after an air abort had them turned back toward Horham. They were to search the English Channel for a lost plane. American jazz musician and big band leader Glenn Miller's plane was lost, a UC-64 Norseman. Somewhere over the English Channel was his wreckage. He was en route from Paris from RAF Twinwood Farm in Clapham. After a couple of hours of searching, they returned to Horham. No trace of the plane, aircrew, or passengers was ever found. The autumn of 1944 was a demanding time for the young men of Easy Going. Although they never got used to combat, they soon knew the routine. They kept adding successful missions in October, November, and December.
On 16 December 1944, the German army launched a massive offensive strike across an 80-mile front in the Ardennes mountain regions of Belgium. The ensuing battle, the bloodiest of World War II, became known as the Battle of the Bulge. The 8th Air Force, including the 95th Bomb Group, flew several missions in direct support of our troops on the ground.
December 24th, 1944. Remember the Battle of the Bulge? That's Christmas Eve. Germany stopped 3,800-pound GPs. 38 100-pounders, 80-foot interval. Visual conditions, couldn't see results due to a large hole in the plexiglass nose. Oh, that's got the nose shot off here. This is after the bomb run. You know, these guys that get scared, they see that it's scary. You see, you're flying, and up ahead there, miles ahead, you see them black puffs coming up like sponges, black sponges, puffs. And you're going and you got to go right into them. You know, you get a little shake up. But when that happens to me, I sit down and I look in that bomb site and I look for the target. Even though I ain't bombing, I'm just flying the ship in case I have to. And I don't control the ship. The site is telling me where it's at, and know which way I got to turn to go over it. But everything else is killed. And most of these guys look at that, they get scared. I put my head in that bomb site and they're looking there. Forget about that. I don't look at that. You don't see nothing down, just a target. And that's all you have to see.
I remember I thought it was Christmas Day, but I think it was the day before Christmas. I saw a couple of planes going down, and it really makes you think about, that's one heck of a way to spend Christmas Day. Of course, you wonder, I knew there was a lot of wonderful guys that you wonder why they didn't come back and you did. And that question is still in my mind, but I still think we were very, very fortunate to return.
The winter of 1944-45 proved to be one of the coldest on record. On Christmas morning, half a world away from friends and family, with 20 missions still remaining, it would be easy for the airmen to lose hope. To continue on, the men not only relied on courage, but also on faith.
There's that great church hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." And of course the flying fortress, the B-17, is called the fortress. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing, our helper he amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate, on earth is not his equal. And I remember singing that in church many times.
I think if you're in combat and if you don't have faith, we had some lads, we had one pilot after 20 missions, he completely lost it, and a nervous breakdown. They had to really send him back to the States. And I noticed whenever you went to church Sunday or whenever, the seats were all filled. I think you realize there's a higher power, and certainly I prayed on every mission, went to church in the morning before we'd go, and it certainly, I think, solidifies that there's something bigger than us here, really.
Well, this is the Bible that I was given by my mother and father, and it's in the front. It says PFC Guy Edward Green, May 9th, 1943, and it's pretty well worn now. As you can see, the cover is separated, but it's a little leather covered full Bible, King James Version. And I carried that in my breast pocket here on every mission I flew.
But I think the thing that I remember, kept me thinking. When we were going overseas, we went from Gander to Goose Bay, Labrador, we met some guys, finished their tour on the way back, and those guys said, do the best you can. Sure, some guys will go down, some guys will get killed, some guys will get, but look at us, we came back. And if we came back, there's a good chance you can come back. And I always kept that in mind.
I guess maybe it helped me. A guy named Schwope, he flew in Hanson's crew with Bombardier, and he wore a top long john shirt, you know, shirt for his whole 25 missions. They get off at 25 missions. And he gave me his shirt without even being washed, and I wore it for all my missions. Matter of fact, I wore it all the way home.
Your lucky shirt.
That lucky shirt. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but you know, you grab at anything for luck. You don't know. See, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
I did not worry about flying missions for my safety or whatever. I just figured if I did die, that's what the price to save our country, you know, really. And if you go look at history pretty closely, we could have lost World War II, you know, fighting on so many fronts. And the Germans, at the conclusion of the World War II, they had airplanes far superior to ours, and we did encounter some German jets while we were flying, and they were much, much faster than we were.
I would go to church once in a while over there, not as much as I should, I guess, but I would say a little prayer when I took off. I didn't know anything about this, how this communication was later on when we had trouble, but that's about what I did when I was taking off, a little prayer there.
Every mission before I went to communion, I said, you didn't have to go to confession even. Priest gave you communion before breakfast.
My faith in my religion, it was strengthened. And I had what I considered a spiritual manifestation while I was there in connection with some of the scriptures that we have.
I was very fortunate to have a loving mother and father, and as we grew up through the Depression days, we were very, very poor, and of course the war came along, and my mother especially didn't want me to enlist, but I said, Mother, that's what I really want to do. And this was a poem that she wrote. Dear God, always keep him safely. Be with him both day and night. Give him the strength to face the enemy. Keep him pathways shining bright. Let thy spirit always linger. Let him know that you are there. Tell him I love him dearly. Shakes me up. And for him I send this prayer. Father, drive away his sadness, cause his troubles all to flee. And when this bitter war is over, God, send him home to me.
The long winter of an anxious crew continued. The worst winter weather in years plagued Europe in December 1944 through February 1945. Many missions were planned, briefed, and readied, only to be weather canceled. Slowly, the crew of Easygoing flew again and again in an erratic schedule, adding to their mission totals and the magic number 35.
The sacrifices made by the air crews and the ground crews who supported them were ones that had never been faced before in any war. This was a major war that affected the entire world. It was called World War II, of course. But they knew that they had, for instance, loss rates on each mission of 8 to 12%. But when you have a 6 to 8 to 12% loss rate in 8 or 10 missions, you've used up your 100% pretty much. This is a sacrifice they were willing to make. Most of the heavy bombers that were shot down during the war were shot down by anti-aircraft fire.
I didn't care about that. I was never scared of that combat. That never bothered me a bit. I don't remember having any stress. I worried more about my wife and 2 kids at home. I didn't worry about myself.
Going in was bad, because once you got on the bomb run, then you pretty much had to stay on it, and then otherwise you could have evasive action. You know, if flak was over here, you could call you could call Johnny and say there's flak, you know, on my right or left, and he'd make evasive action. But it was a terrible feeling when we were approaching the bomb site, when they would open the bomb bays, because then all that rushing air would come in, and it was cold, and you could feel it, and you knew where you were. But it's a feeling of elation when the bombs are dropped and the plane takes off. Then the pilot can again take evasive action and get on home.
You could bomb those oil targets, and the smoke would be up in the clouds before we got out of the area.
You know, after we dropped the bombs, we would always make a descending turn, and they would keep that flak right with us. I could never figure that out. Well, we had 1,200 planes on some missions, and I think you can see about 75 miles when you're up in the 20,000 something. You can see planes forever, you know. You were part of a team over there. One time there was a plane right above my head that had the bomb bays open, and I could see in it that the bombs they hadn't unloaded. And I immediately called Johnny, and I said, if they drop their bombs, we're dead. And I don't know what kind of maneuver that he did, but we slid out from under the bombs, and they went on by. But I could see the bombs as they would peel out of the bomb bays.
Here would be the lead plane, and I'd see our wing just barely touch his tail, and Johnny would pull it away. And Johnny kept close formation, yet he avoided any disasters or anything. And he did a masterful job.
Because of the massive amount of airplanes that assembled for every mission, every last detail had to be meticulously planned and executed with precision. The flight crews always received a thorough pre-flight briefing, including the forecasted weather and the primary and secondary target information, including a bomb run photo. Timing was always critical. Every crew was assigned an exact time for taxi, takeoff, and rendezvous, as well as their position in the huge bomber formation.
While I was bombing over Germany, I was thinking of my forefathers, that I was actually bombing the land of my forefathers that had come from Germany years before. And it was very devastating to me to see the effects of our bombing. And I worried about it, but I was delighted to be able to come home, and later on it was my privilege to meet some of my relatives from over there, and I was glad I was a poor shot.
The war in Europe dragged on through the early months of 1945 and looked like it might last late into the year. Adding to the difficulties and dangers associated with flying 35 missions in bad weather and relentless flak barrages, intelligence reports began to surface of new, deadly German weapons. Production had begun on a fast, silent-running new U-boat submarine that could remain submerged for up to 3 days. Even more concerning for the B-17 crews was the emergence of the first jet aircraft, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the fastest aircraft in existence, with speeds greater than 500 miles per hour.
I remember I was just gazing out of the windows, and to my right there was a strange aircraft. I took a couple of looks at it. I couldn't see a propeller on it. I had no idea of a jet, and it just seemed to be suspended in air. I couldn't have shot at it because it was too far to my right, but I didn't make any attempt to get my sights on it, and it seemed like all at once it just pulled away and just disappeared. That was my first sight of the jet aeroplane.
Finally, on March 30th, 1945, despite all odds, the crew of Easy Going reached the 35th mission.
The mission that I remember the most that was the worst as far as enemy was the last one, and over Hamburg. Mm-hmm. It was truly there was a lot of flak, and a lot of planes was lost, and there was lots of commotion.
The most memorable was our last one. We had some very severe situations. However, the crew, we shared an aircraft with the crew, and on their 35th mission, they were lost over Berlin, and we don't know whatever happened to them. And so, of course, you're very apprehensive about your last mission. You want to come through. And ours was to Hamburg, and for some reason or other, we went in at 22,000 feet in height instead of usually 28, and we encountered some light clouds.
The last mission to Hamburg on March 30th, 1945, which was Good Friday. We're going over, and after we passed the channels, everything over the continent was like a mattress, white, foamy clouds and all. And I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden I said, gee, they got dirty clouds here. And the guys laughed, and they said, that's not dirty clouds, that's flak. And then the further we got to the target, the heavier the flak got. Well, we got the daylights knocked out of us because we were next to last of the 8th Air Force. By that time, they had the guns zeroed in on us.
Flak, when it would burst, if it was close enough, when it would first burst, if they'd get your altitude, there would be a beautiful, if you want to call it that, a kind of a scarlet red fire, and then it would bark. It would sound like a dog barking. And if it were close enough, so you could actually hear that it sounded like somebody had thrown rocks on the side of the airplane where the shrapnel would hit the plane.
Every mission you had flak, that was for sure, and it was very intense once you hit the target.
They were really shooting at us big time, and they must have had us centered in with those radar right on our bomb bay, because you could hear it sound like you were wrenching a motor off.
The plane was shot up pretty much, and when we returned to the base, I think that was the last flight for that plane. There were 2 other times I really prayed in combat, and so this was my 3rd time. And
I felt I didn't really feel any different from any other mission. You had no inkling that it was going to be a bad mission, but it just developed that way. Mm-hmm. They had those stories about the one-armed flak gunners, and they say that they would, when they get injured on the front, they'd make flak gunners out of them and send them to Hamburg. Really? And that's where they had the submarine pins.
I remember that we used heavy bombs with steel nose, so they'd penetrate the pins. I think they call them submarine pins, is what they call them. And it would penetrate the concrete, and then after it would go through the concrete, it would explode underneath, and the expansion would destroy the pins.
On the 35th mission, had the daylights shot out of us, and then when we got back, coming back over the channel, Johnny asked if he could go in ahead to buzz the tower, which was a normal process. So we go in, and he got real close to the control tower, and they all seemed to jump away. And then when we landed, we got back to the hard stand, and we had taken the guns out, and we're cleaning them in the tent. And the crew chief says, I want you guys to come here with me. And we didn't want, why did he want us to go there? So we went out to the plane, and he had the bomb bay open, and about 3/4 of the main spar had been shot away. Well, up on top of the plane, it looked perfect. See, nothing happened on top of the plane. And he says, you guys here buzz the field? That plane could have snapped and you would have all been gone.
An interesting thing was when you returned from a mission, they would give you a sugar cookie and a shot of whiskey for some reason or other. So some of us didn't care for whiskey, so we ate the sugar cooks and gave the whiskey to some of the other crew, you know. So, but anyway, we really, you do stoop over and kiss the ground. I mean, and we also have to give credit to the ground crew for our aircraft. They always were concerned.
We normally had they had some cognac, I think it was. They gave us about this much cognac before they debriefed us, and we'd really talk, I guess. Liberated cognac.
After 35 missions complete, John Gross was called into the squadron commander's office at Horham and asked, "Fly an old, war-torn B-17 home back across the Atlantic to stateside, or take a troop ship?" He chose the latter for his crew. They boarded the USS Marine Devil and headed home. VE Day came on May 8, 1945, when they were on board ship in the North Atlantic. Victory in Europe, the unconditional surrender of the armed forces of Hitler's Nazi Germany, and the long-awaited end to his Third Reich.
My name is John W. Gross Jr. I was a pilot in World War II, flying B-17s and stationed in Orham, England.
My responsibility to bombardiers is to put the bombs on the target.
George Aspercolis, our bombardier, he was from New Jersey. He was a real character. He was known as the ladies' man. Dan Jaworski was our navigator, and he was 18 years old, which was very unusual. He was the youngest on our crew, and he didn't even have a driver's license. A very bright man.
Dan really was a fine young man, very clean, good upbringing. He was just a very polite, not a profane person, just a wonderful person.
Bill Isbell, Montgomery, Alabama. Well, it was something that was a great experience, but not something I would want to do again.
Edward Francis Patrick Morrison, I was a ball turret operator, and Guy Green always kidded me about Francis Patrick.
Art Mendius, he was our engineer. He was from Tulare, California, and after the war he went to work for an airline and became an engineer.
He was really a jewel, you know. He could repair anything on the plane, do anything.
My name is Max Hegstad-Ramo, my middle name there. It's an old Danish name. And I was born on the 24th of May, 1923, in a little town called Tetonia, Idaho, up in Teton County.
My name is Guy Green. I was a radio operator on a B-17 Easy Going. I can't express the feeling I have about this cemetery and coming back to Horham. It's a part of my life that I'll never forget. And I was only here 9 months. Our crew was a very tight-knit crew, and we were all very good friends. And as a surviving veteran of 35 missions, I just feel that I was very fortunate and that God watched over us. It's just hard to express. The longer I live, the more I cherish the friendship with all of my crew members and all the members of the 95th that I served with.
The Old Airfield by Kate Kirkham. Strolling through these fields so green, where once a throng of life has been, a feeling so evoked in me of sadness amidst tranquility.
For beneath where now grows golden corn, bonds as strong as steel were born. Laughter, tears, and stories shared amongst the comrades of the air.
And as on concrete strips I tread, the backbone from whence missions led, I can almost hear the roar, as engines to the heavens soar.
We count them out, we count them in, through the ever-extending din. This by those who watched and cared for men whose lives might not be spared.
Day after day, night after night, into another enduring flight. The hardcore now so cracked and worn, each tell a story for those who mourn.
Yet now looking up to the clear night sky, over the airfield to stars on high, I feel sure that in this patchwork of land, our faithful friends stretch out their hands. This land which now yields sheaves of gold will forever breathe a life of old. Never forget, they came, they went, and for you and me, their lives were spent.